This is Dead Serious, a show about short horror stories worthy of discussion. I'm Dead Palette, the real reason Jam's restaurant burnt down in Guilty Gear X2. Today we are reading Stone Chambers by Robo Ky, an artist, a writer, whatever the fuck you want to call him, that I really like. But let's get right into it with all of my bias. Dotting western New England and eastern New York's forest are thousands of enigmatic buildings referred to as the Stone Chambers. Paid little attention to by mainstream academia, these omnipresent structures appear to have been part of the landscape for at least as long as humans have lived in the region. Despite hand-waving by local historians that they're all colonial root cellars, there have never been a shred of evidence to pinpoint who built them, when, or for what. No Native American tribes have ever claimed ownership, and no data exists to support any of the wild speculation alternate historical researchers often make about their origins. No artifacts, no markings, no signs of habitation. Nothing but uniform construction and precision gives away their artificial nature. So again, just putting this out there, of course I'm biased, I like Robo Ky, but I think that this is a really strong start. It's a great premise. Whenever you're dealing with history and you're making this very clear that these things are an anomaly and they're unexplained. So it's an unexplained anomaly, an unexplained man-made structure that is not being claimed by anyone. That is an interesting concept, especially when it's one that we've never really heard of before. I've never heard of these things. It's not like Stonehenge or something like that, where it's hard to pinpoint who made them. This is America. This is something that a lot of the people who are going to read this are very close to, and I think that this is a strong start for that reason. But let's get into what the story is really doing. A small body of folklore and anecdotes has sprung up around the structures to fill the vacuum of veritable information. So now we have some bullet points that we're going to go down, starting with, in May 1988, Frank Mullen and his son spent a weekend fishing and camping in Fahrenstack State Park, Dutchess County, New York. On the second evening of their trip, the two decided to set up their tent next to a chamber. When Mr. Mullen awoke the next morning, his son, Terrence, was missing. He spent hours searching himself before he finally contacted local authorities. No sign of the boy was found in the surrounding area, and teams combing the entire length of the park found nothing. The only piece of evidence ever discovered baffled police. Inside the chamber were a set of prints belonging to Mr. Mullen's son. It appeared as though the boy had been taken 4 or 5 steps into the chamber sometime during the night, then stopped. What unsettled investigators was not just that no prints heading out of the chamber were found, but that a set of large, unidentifiable tracks were discovered starting from the back wall to meeting Terrence's. One completely overlaid the boy's last step. The strange footprints were never positively identified, and no proper explanation was ever given for them. Terrence Mullen is still missing. Now that's a bizarre little anecdote. It's very Stranger Things before Stranger Things. I like this idea. It's a very simple idea. It's not the strongest thing that this story has going for it. So let's continue on to the next bullet point. Many counties and municipalities have made it illegal to destroy or modify the chambers. These laws appear to have never been passed for any historical preservation reasons. Most of them have been on the books for hundreds of years. You can read, Brandon. Often explain themselves by ensuring the safety of local populace from outside harm. Ooh. So, that's when I thought that this story really meant something. This little bit right here, that they would pass laws about this that aren't for preservation, as you would expect, but are from outside harm. That is vague enough, and American laws are weird enough to where some concerned parent in the 1800s would come by and say, hey, we need to protect ourselves from this, and someone would put a law on the book saying we got to protect ourselves from outside harm, and it would just stay vague like that for a century. That is a beautiful little concept, and I think that this is where creepypasta shines, in these little details like this. That's powerful. But let's move on to the next bullet point and not blow too much smoke up Robo Ky's ass. Many have reported severe vertigo and disorientation when spending extended periods inside the chamber. Some claim to feel eyes upon their back when facing away from the entrance. Next bullet point. A legend originating in the Lake Champlain region, usually set in the 1920s, tells of a woman who used a stone cellar on her property to store canned goods. One summer morning, she went out to find a jar of jam and found she could not exit the chamber once she had entered. Some invisible force blocked her way. She panicked and soon fainted. When she awoke, she found she could leave. Outside, snow covered the ground and her house was missing. The trees are said to have never looked very wrong. When she wandered down a wooded trail where her street should have been, she saw dozens of stone chambers lining the path. From inside them came horrible gnashing sounds. Scared out of her wits, she ran back to the chamber she had awoken in and huddled inside until she passed out from exhaustion. She was found by her husband some indeterminable time later. She asked him how long she had been out. He explained with both relief and confusion that no one had seen her in 2 years, and he had planned to tear down the cellar because it reminded him of her disappearance. This story here, this bullet point, I think is just the proper amount of bullshit. Come on, no fucking way. This is the right amount to stretch. This is the perfect amount of tall tale. It's far back enough to where you would reasonably assume that record keeping would be kind of shitty and not up to snuff. The story is possibly explained away by a hoax, so that is there. That is something that is a worthwhile way of explaining away something that seems impossible, like she just disappeared for 2 years and maybe there was a messed up marriage or something like that. There are these kind of explanations. Any way that you could discredit those from multiple ways, but you also couldn't disprove it. So I think that this is functioning in that way, and that's why I like that bit. But let's continue on to the next bullet point. No copies of the only serious text ever written about the chambers, an analysis of the stone cellars of New England, exists today. Only a few mentions in historical quarterlies and a single quotation in a Massachusetts newspaper are all that's left, written by an anonymous author in 1919. The book was apparently a dense academic piece describing a number of physical and mathematical properties expressed in the chamber's architecture which relate to ether physics. The final section in the tome postulated that the chambers acted as conduits or ether energy that could be tuned to view the outside. These would appear to be the reasons the book garnered negative attention from the academic world at the time, as Einsteinian physics was coming into vogue. So in this bullet point, we get that there is lost information. That is a very interesting thing to do, a very creepypasta thing to do. We're given the explanation that this view of these things was kind of blocked out by Einsteinian physics. That is a very practical, real-world thing that happens. Scientific models are flawed. They are not perfect. when one model gains traction, that doesn't mean that model of the world is accurate. It just means that model is more accurately depicting more information from the real world, from the world independent of humans, than other models. That doesn't necessarily mean that the other models are invalid, and any scientist would tell you the same thing. They would also caution you of going too far interpreting what that means, but models are not perfect. Models start to break down. Models are temporary. They are there until they're replaced with better models. So this is a great explanation of why this information was kind of pushed to the side and not taken seriously, but that we get references to it from historical quarterlies and a single quote from a Massachusetts newspaper. That's wonderful. It's perfect Fleming effect, just the right amount of little details to know that this text really existed. That's beautiful. But let's move on to our last bullet point. The word returning is often used in association with the chambers, although the origin of this connection has never been discovered. All right, that is perfectly vague, and we can take that as face value. That is maybe the least important thing, or maybe the most important thing in this list of bullet points. But going back to the quotation before last, the bullet point before last, about this, this is the only serious text ever written and it's disappeared, and there's no copies of it left. This tells us that our author is the person collecting these things, and that they're interested in it. And their interest in the subject is being projected onto us. They're interested, and so I, as the reader, am very interested in what they're saying. They're clearly very enthused about this subject, so much so that they've done all this research and gathered this nice little primer on the situation of the stone chambers. That is wonderful, but let's continue on and finish up this story. Despite the strange, ominous story surrounding the stone chambers, those who have lived around them for generations seem to, for the most part, ignore them. When reminded of the stone chambers lore, locals of the region will often dismiss the stories as superstitious nonsense. You will be hard-pressed, though, to find someone willing to spend the night alone in one. So that's a cute little ending. A lot of the times in these creepypastas, when they kind of like turn it on you, or say like, they were never seen again, or be careful out there, or, you know, make sure you always check your closet. You gotta be careful with those, because they get a little bit too corny. This is a very practical, a real world thing of like, these stone chambers are out there and people cohabitate with them, but they're still not going to go around them. That's a lot more subtle and a lot more realistic, so they can pull that off. So whenever you're trying to end a story in that way, with that kind of like widening it out and saying this affects you too, be careful not to be too on the nose about it. And I think that this is a good role model for that. So overall, really like this story. Has enough strong instances of weird things happening with sort of plausible deniability as to why they might be happening, that it's conspiratorial enough. It's digging into history. It's digging into science. It's very much so grounding itself in the real world. It's grounding itself in journalism. It's grounding itself in practicality, which is what you need to do if you are a creepypasta. This story is succeeding as a creepypasta. Now, I made it a joke, and I really do need to stress this. I really like Robo Ky's work, so I am biased, and I need to make that perfectly clear. I think it's important that I am forward with that bias, and make it clear as to why I'm enjoying his work. I like his work because I like it. But we do have a sponsor for today. Not a paid sponsor, but a sponsor. Today's sponsor is Robo Ky. Robo Ky suggested that I read this story, or rather, suggested I take a look at this story. I had already read it, but he sent me a lovely little note on YouTube through the little direct messaging thing about my analysis and reading of 12 minutes, where he complimented me and said some very nice words. I was really humbled when I saw that. That meant a lot to me that he would write in, or he or she would write in and tell me those things. And I just thought it was incredibly nice of them to do that. And so I decided to read this story since they brought it up. Kind of rambling now, but I should probably go ahead and talk about this. It does kind of feel weird when you're an artist, when certain things get recognized and certain things don't. A lot of the times it feels like success is random. And one of the things Robo Ky commented on in the message that they sent to me was that they were humbled that 12 minutes took off and that someone would even take the time to analyze it in the way that I did. And it was because it got Pasta of the Month on the Creepypasta Wikia. And he or she was commenting that it's kind of strange that story takes off, and they're hoping that some other stories do the same thing. I thought that it would be worthwhile to tackle this story since they pointed it out as a strong one. So I wanted to point it out as well, because it is a strong one. It does do a lot of things well. And interestingly enough, I think it's doing things well that are pretty different than the other well-known Robo Ky story, 12 Minutes. I can kind of tell they're from the same author, but they're succeeding in very different ways. This one is a lot more grounded, and I think that 12 Minutes is a bit more conceptual and kind of is really rooted around its end reveal. But overall, I really like this story. I recommend it. Even though I just read it to you, go read it for yourself independent. Hopefully you've been reading along. But do comment in the comment section below what you think of this story. I'm sure Robo Ky will be very interested in hearing what you have to say, even if it's negative criticism. So thank you for your time, and fuck off.